Welcome to Leadership, the unapologetic political podcast where we dive headfirst into the world of leadership, politics, and those pivotal issues that often go unaddressed. We're here to empower, educate, and ignite change with a special focus on inspiring women to step into positions of influence. In this podcast, we don't shy away from tough conversations. We're all about getting down to brass tacks, discussing what truly matters, and encouraging you to take the reins. Join us on this journey as we unravel the intricacies of leadership, delve into the political landscape, and tackle the uncharted territories of vital issues. Leadership is your platform for unfiltered, honest, and inspiring discussions that will drive you to make your mark on the world. Let's get started. Hi, welcome to Leadership with Tamie Wilson. Today, I have a very special guest, author, and you're an attorney, right, David?
Yeah, sure am.
Yeah, and attorney David Pepper. David is a very well-known Democrat. I'm sure you've seen him on all the national news channels. He has written several books. His latest book, Saving Democracy, is a really good read, so make sure you check it out. It's really awesome. But David, why don't you go ahead and tell the audience about yourself and your history, your background?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm actually in Cincinnati, the southwest corner of Ohio. Born and raised here, and been involved in politics several decades. I was here when we had some real challenging times as a city, so I ran for city council. I ultimately ran for county commission, and I won both those. And then I ultimately ran statewide a couple times in some tough years, but became the party chair after 2014. And so I've always kind of had this. I entered politics because I believe it was about public service. I still do. I wasn't that partisan, but as I got into these statewide campaigns, and especially as party chair, I saw just how broken politics is in Ohio, and that for far too many people in charge, Republicans, it's not public service. It's truly this very broken game of power and extremism and not wanting to serve the public. And so after I stopped being a party chair statewide, I decided to start trying to capture in books what was happening. And that's kind of led me to this sort of interesting path where I'm kind of running all over the country talking about what's happening in these broken states like Ohio. So it's been an interesting journey where, again, I started out really not very partisan, but seeing what I saw in Ohio is so horrifying that I'm trying to it may seem partisan when I do it, but I'm trying to explain, no, this is deeper. This is democracy itself is under attack from this very extreme brand of the right wing of the party, Republican Party, that has gotten hold of the Ohio State House and so many other states around the country. So that's sort of my new mission. As you mentioned, I'm a lawyer. I also teach voting rights and essentially democracy and the law of democracy. I do that at University of Cincinnati Law School. I also have a Substack where I kind of have a virtual law course. So kind of a lot of things at once. And I've written a few novels as well.
Oh, wow, that's so interesting. Yeah, you and I talk quite often about democracy and the changes in Ohio. So, years ago, Ohio was a blue state. When did you see the shift take place?
The way I would describe Ohio is I think we've been a purple state that the default is we lean a little bit red. So when Obama won Ohio, it's a big deal. It's not easy to win Ohio. Clinton won, but Ross Perot was there. Obama winning, huge deal, inspired turnout that we hadn't seen, won over rural parts of Ohio. Obama did, not to win them outright, but to get to 40% versus 30 or something. And that scared the heck out of Ohio Republicans. That the state, they felt like they pretty much could control. They had lost. They didn't just lose it, though, at the federal level. They lost state house power. A Democrat was governor named Ted Strickland.
Yes.
When Obama won in 2008, Democrats won the state house. Even though they had gerrymandered that state house in 2001, Democrats were in charge because of that Obama coalition. We had 10 out of the 18 congressional seats after that. So when did it all change? When they freaked out that this diverse coalition knocked them out of power. They didn't care that much about John McCain losing power. This is a really important thing to remember. They didn't love John McCain. So it wasn't like that's what freaked them out. What freaked them out was they lost power here in the state.
Yeah.
Most of what they do is state level, whether it's first energy bailouts or abortion bans, it's state level. So when they lost power in the state due to the Obama coalition, young people, voters of color, a broad coalition, the minute they had their chance to undo the coalition that threatened their power long term, which they had the chance to do after 2010, they went to work. Gerrymandering, intense voter suppression, purging, trying to go after early vote, trying to get young voters not voting. And that was something that happened all over the country. So that's when I'd say the shift from this sort of swingy, somewhat purple, but leaning red, it was the fact that we were blue in '08. That was the moment where they thought we can't allow this. Rather than changing their views or their messaging to appeal to that broad coalition that threatened them, they decided, well, we don't want to change our views, which is what a democracy sort of is supposed to be about. They decided we're just going to really take the knees out from under the coalition that defeated us by gerrymandering the amount of power and by suppressing the core constituents in that coalition, which they did. And then that allows them to be extremists and still stay in power. So I think that's when that's why the 2010 losses by Democrats in many states, the 2011 gerrymandering, all the attacks on early vote and other forms of voter suppression, and then a Supreme Court that in Shelby County said, oh, pretty much that stuff's all fine. That's what added up to essentially, this very fast moving downward spiral in Ohio. And the reason I write these books is to say that's the story of America in many states. It's not just Ohio. I don't want it to be Ohio at all, but I wish if it were only one state, that's better than what it is, which is dozens of states doing this all together. So that's really and I kind of saw this all up close because I ran in 2010.
Right.
I ran when, because you're running yourself, how great it would have been to be running around Ohio in 2010 when 10 out of the 18 members of Congress were Democrats. And when I was governor, like people can't even imagine that's what we had. And they were so freaked out by that they have been working to destroy it ever since. And they still are today.
Yeah. Yeah. So you and I both know all of the gerrymandering that has taken place here in Ohio. So I guess it would be 11 years ago now that Ohioans voted to have fair maps and fair districts. So then, but in 2022, we had the Fair District Commission draw new maps that were unconstitutional. They were deemed unconstitutional. But as you know, we still do not have new maps. So can you kind of talk about that? What is the answer to that issue? I mean, this is happening across the country as well.
Right.
I mean, what do we do about that?
Well, my hope is when you win this November,
I love that. Yeah.
in January, at the federal level, we passed the John Lewis Voting Rights
since you
Act.
mentioned that, why didn't they? I say this every time we talk about voting. Why didn't they pass that right when Biden got elected? I mean,
it was a historic mistake that they didn't have that be the very top of the agenda at the beginning. I know there were a lot of things to do. So it's easy to say in hindsight. But what they should have said was, of course, we have to rescue the country from what Trump left us, COVID, economy going downhill. But they should have said so the reason is the House passed it. The Senate had two Democratic senators who agreed that it was okay to filibuster these bills, which is, if you read the first book I've written, you should not be able, it's not legitimate to filibuster bills that will save democracy itself.
Yeah.
And at the very beginning, what I think the Democrats should have done is said to Schumer and not Schumer, to Manchin and Sinema, hey, it may not be the first vote we call, although maybe it should have been.
Yeah.
But you will not we will pass these bills on voting rights. We will. And why are these bills so important? I'll talk about the state level stuff in a second. But one, they would have reenacted the Voting Rights Act and recovered it from what Shelby County did to it. Two, within these bills are also rules that would end gerrymandering as we know it. And those should have passed. We had a 2-year window to pass them. We didn't. And I think a major reason we didn't is because no one said to the Democratic senators who went along and allowed the Republican filibuster to take hold, they should have said at the very beginning, you're not getting anything you want this 2-year term unless you agree with other Democrats to not allow the filibuster to stop this. Once they allowed all these other bills to pass without holding people's feet to the fire, then they had no leverage when the voting rights stuff finally came up. And so Sinema and Manchin, unfortunately, went along with and said, well, we're not going to overturn the filibuster, essentially. So I think the Democrats at the beginning of Biden's term were not as focused on this needing to happen as they should have been. And once they figured it out January of 2023, I'm sorry, of 2022, it was too late. And but being the optimist that I am, if we manage to reelect Biden, keep the Senate, and elect a House majority, it is the first thing that should happen. So that's one solution. But regardless of that solution, in states like Ohio, we also should do other things like ending gerrymandering through ballot initiative this year. We can do that. Like running in every district so that extremists don't ever face non-accountability again. So much of why they're doing what they're doing is because in far too many places they can. And, tell me what, now you wouldn't do this, or I wouldn't do this, but if people do something insanely unpopular, like ban abortions, no exceptions, or attack voters, and they don't even have an election the next November, what are they going to do? They're going to do it again. It's obvious they'll do it again because in their career, they're not held accountable. They face no consequence from being an out-of-touch extremist. That's why it's so important we run against them. So there's sort of of course, we need the federal law. We can change state law. We're lucky we're one of 18 states in America that we can actually change our constitution. Let's do it. But in every state, we should be running against all these people at the congressional and the state house level to bring accountability back. And other races matter too. I'm sure you see them on the trail. We need to win Supreme Court races in states like Ohio, because in states like Ohio, who's on your state Supreme Court? Like we're going to see, like we just saw in Wisconsin, like we saw in Pennsylvania a few years ago, could very well determine if gerrymandering exists or not. So we have to start seeing that all these levels of politics really matter when it comes to democracy. Not only think that a few Senate races are going to save the day. We need to focus on all of it. If we do, we can have federal laws change. We can have state law change. We can bring accountability back. And we need to start seeing that our front line for democracy is the same as theirs. It's the state level. It's not only federal.
Right. So you said so many things. Now, one thing that you and I have both expressed total disdain for is the fact that Democrats, one, they don't vote and they don't run in every race. So there is a sense, and I feel that there's been a shift in the tide in Ohio since we did pass abortion and marijuana. But so many Ohioans have been so apathetic. And do you feel that is attributing to them not voting? What can we do to re-energize our base? We know that Republicans turn out to vote. I strongly feel if Democrats would have shown out last election, I could have beat Jordan. There are 783,000 voters in my district. Only 525 are registered, but only 300 actually show up to vote.
Right.
And so I am a moderate enough candidate that I can win over the independents and, common sense Republicans. So what can we do to get our base to actually show up to vote? I have several ideas, but I'd love to hear yours.
Right. Well, one is I do think what happens in these gerrymandered worlds where we don't run against half the people, and this isn't quite as bad in Ohio as other states, people are going to check out.
Yeah.
They don't see anything on their ballot that seems like it isn't already predetermined.
Yeah.
If you and so I think one is, you start ending gerrymandering, you start running everywhere. You have people knocking on door explaining what's going on, like all around the state, in every state house district of your district, for example. It starts to create more of a churn in politics where people see, oh my gosh, there's a lot at stake. If no one's running, if they never hear from one side, if they look at the presidential and think, well, they don't love either one of them, let's say, and that's going to be true of some voters. Well, they
I
think,
mean, what do we do about Biden? He's not on the
yeah, like
ballot.
none of it matters, none of it. And so I think that one of the worst impacts of the intense gerrymandering, lack of competition, is just a complete sort of lull into not caring. Um, and a lull because there's no media. No one covers a non-competitive race or an uncontested. There's no media coverage. There's no transparency about what the incumbent actually did. And all of a
Didn't
sudden,
do.
there's not a lot. Insiders may see it, but the average voter who has a busy life just doesn't see it. So they just
They
don't
don't.
see that things really going on that's worth getting engaged in. On the other side, I'd say Democrats also can be far more. I think we need to be a little more edgy in messaging.
Yeah.
I think Republicans are actually generally better in sort of a bad way of figuring out how to get their base fired up. Why did Donald Trump tell Mike Johnson don't do a deal on immigration? Because he wants to spend the next 6 months saying how it's broken and scary, and that's why you should vote for him. That's
Yeah.
horrible. Like he's intentionally not solving problems, but he's doing it because he thinks I need something to get my base energized.
Yeah.
So they think that way. They
What
want
is
to.
an issue for us, do you think?
I mean, I clearly since summer of 22, a lot of it is Dobbs.
Yeah.
And I think if you lean into Dobbs and what will happen if Trump wins or if Jim Jordan gets his way, I think that people will see that. And one reason we've seen actually a real winning streak in a lot of races that we normally would lose when we have the White House is because actually candidates have done that well, and the issue has been so obvious. I think a couple other issues around that could do it if we were smart would be they're literally in the middle of destroying public education right as we
Yes.
speak.
Yeah.
People don't support that. Universal vouchers, if understood for what they are, aren't popular. We need to be better at going on offense on that kind of issue. That is a real issue. If you have kids in school or you are in a community that's proud of your school, which is most, what they're doing to education through vouchers is disastrous and could be another big time issue that affects real lives and real communities. And you need to go on offense. And sometimes I think that the
Oh,
Democrats
yeah.
kind of we are so concerned. Of course, and by the way, you want to find, and this is what they do. There are some issues that if we do them right, are both issues that independent voters agree with us on, that our base is energized by. Those are the strongest issues.
Yeah.
I think Dobbs is that type of issue. I think democracy, if talked about the right way, is that kind of issue. I think public education is that kind of issue. So you, as a candidate, can go talk to independent voters about, do you really want your tax money paying to bail out well-off families who already are going to private school while
Yeah.
your school is underfunded? That's an issue for the base, but also for independents. When they talk about immigration, they're doing that. They're trying to get an issue that will fire up their base and also appeal to independents and demonize Democrats and independents. We have to think about it that way as well. And what do we do instead? We too often find an issue that we're so desperate to sort of appeal to independents that we don't have a message that fires up our own base.
Mm.
And so we're going so to the middle and so milk toast,
Yes.
so moderate. We so moderate our message
Yeah.
that the Democrats who are most, the most loyal Democrats are saying, well, you're not saying anything that actually excites me.
Right.
And therefore, we don't even have a turnout that can get us a victory. And I hate to say it, in 2022, bless you. Hey, you got Pepper on the line. You're going to sneeze, right?
That's so funny.
In 2022, you look closely and you were part of this. You paid the price for this. We had no Democratic turnout in our cities in Ohio.
Yeah.
And if you haven't energized your base with some core issues that energize them, you can win over all the independent voters in the world you want. You will never win.
Yeah.
And and so what they try and do is find issues that energize their base and appeal to independents. Too often, I worry, some of our candidates at least, they're so desperate to win over the independents that they forget about the base, and all of a sudden we have no turnout. Who didn't do that? Gretchen Whitmer. Gretchen Whitmer won going away. Shapiro in Pennsylvania won going away. They talked about Dobbs and they talked about freedom and other issues in a way that the base was motivated, turnout was good, and they won over independents. So those are sort of the pathways to, I think, success.
So are you kind of alluding to Tim Ryan's race?
I don't want to get into specific names, but I think Tim ran a very good race overall. I think that Tim, look at how he did. The governor's race was a 26-point loss. Tim lost by only 6. So I actually think he did a good job overall compared to the top of the ticket. Normally, the governor finish and the Senate finish and the down ticket are all around the same. So I think I think the governor's race never really got on first base. But I would say that Tim, when you look at the turnout in urban Ohio, clearly nobody into the 22 cycle energized base Democrats. Our most loyal voters, African Americans, African American women in particular, even more than men. And so I think if you look back, if I were Sherrod Brown, for example, I would have looked at 22 and said, what are we going to do? If we didn't energize our base in 22 and we do not solve that problem in 24, none of us is going to win. And so I think Tim actually overall, he did better than anyone else. So it's hard to criticize him. He overperformed the governor's race by 20. But when you see the turnout numbers in our bigger cities, clearly the problem was that would have kept him from winning regardless, is if you don't have turnout in your urban areas, as a Democrat, you're just not going to win. And it's not as if that can't be done. In 18, we had very high turnout in our urban areas. Sherrod won by 7. Cordray didn't win, but he only lost by 3.5. But the turnout in our cities was actually the highest in decades. That was for a variety of reasons, but Tim needed that as well. And I do think it's fair to say that some of his messaging would not have stoked that kind of turnout. And that's something that the lesson learned from 22 has to be, you need a strong top of the ticket. That did not exist. But you also need to have a very strong message for turnout of your core Democrats. And the lack of that, I think, in the end, was a problem that you better fix, or you're not going to win anything going forward.
So we have the Supreme Court race coming up.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a very, very important race that we have going on here. So what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, so I was chair for 5 years. Nothing.
What years were those?
I was chair from very beginning of 15 to the end of 20. Nothing mattered. We reelected Sherrod, which was great. But the real victory long term, the thing I'm most proud of, is that we took a Supreme Court where we didn't have one seat at one point. We flipped 3, and we all know that Justice O'Connor was a moderate. So we basically got ourselves control of the House Supreme Court. In my time, it was, a lot of people made it happen. It was one of our priorities. We're very proud of that. It was a real loss that we lost 3. We lost that advantage when Maureen O'Connor retired, and we did not repeat those victories in 22. But 24 gives us the opportunity to do so. Now, why does this matter so much? It goes back to how Republicans are attacking democracy. The front line are state houses. That's where they do the damage. They are very scared of any institution that can hold their front line accountable, like a state Supreme Court. So when we have a Supreme Court like we had for a couple of years striking down their gerrymandered maps, that is the greatest threat to their power. And so they were very focused on trying to make sure that we lost this independent Supreme Court to hold them accountable. They literally changed the rules of how we elect candidates by adding party ID to the ballot, which was a real setback. And they managed to get themselves now a majority that supports them and sadly, it doesn't stand independently. But 2024 is the opportunity to go in two directions. One, we can win if both Justices Stewart and Donnelly, two wonderful candidates, wonderful people, public servants and justices, if they win and we can flip one seat with another very good candidate named Lisa Forbes, we can win back that Supreme Court majority. If they manage to knock off one or two of those incumbents and not win and beat Lisa Forbes, then we're back to almost where we were when I started as chair, which was a place we do not want to be. Because the current court, and I say this as a lawyer, I also know some of these people, they have already shown every indication, the current 4-3 majority, they're going along with the state house. They will not hold them accountable. Remember this issue one we all dealt with last year, where they tried to get rid of our ability to run independent ballot campaigns by changing the rules. That was literally scheduled on a date that violated Ohio law. The state house itself had banned having elections, special statewide elections, in August. They passed a statute saying that. So, of course, there was a court challenge later when the state house ordered having an election on a day that they had made it illegal to have an election. I mean, it's like lawless as can be. An election day that is illegal. That got taken to the Ohio Supreme Court. In the Ohio Supreme Court, the current majority, and this is a real scary precedent for everything going forward, they said, oh, it doesn't matter. The state house is allowed to break their own laws, essentially. And by 4-3, they ruled that way. So the Ohio Supreme Court ruled that, yes, indeed, there can be an election on a day that violates Ohio law, the Ohio statute, that the state house is even able to do that. They can break their own laws. That's scary. And that is not the majority we need going forward. And if once you recognize that that's that majority, that means everything going forward is in the balance if they stay in the majority. What are they going to do? All four of them being endorsed by Ohio Right to Life on cases where there's a challenge to a new law that makes abortion difficult after our constitutional amendment to protect reproductive freedom. I don't trust them to do this the right way. These are people who, again, they allowed an election that was illegal to happen. Do I trust them to uphold the new right to reproductive freedom we all voted for last November? Of course not. They're also going to be the group that oversees whether or not there's gerrymandering. I don't trust them. They allowed an illegal election to happen. So that's all in the balance. So again, amid all the other things that are on the ballot, the right to reproductive freedom that we enshrined, and let's say we protect gerrymandering this November, we end gerrymandering this November with this new ballot initiative. We want a court that's independent to review those things. And if the court is made of Joe Dieters, an old friend of DeWine's, Pat DeWine, the son of Mike DeWine, and two others, I don't trust that these new rights and new processes that we're voting for will be protected. If it's Stewart and Donnelly and Bruner and Forbes, I have full trust, not as a Democrat, but as a lawyer who believes in the rule of law, that those four justices will uphold the rule of law of the state of Ohio. That's all in the balance. We win 3, we flip the court. If we don't, we put the court in the hands of people who, frankly, I think will be as egregious on other types of rulings as they were allowing an election that was illegal to take place.
I mean, with that being said, what can we do to hold them accountable? I mean, they're not following the law. We just passed these 2 ballot initiatives, marijuana and abortion, and they have still not allowed those to, go forward. They're trying to stop them. I mean, we just voted on this, and they're still trying to find ways to end them or compromise them. So, I mean, what is it? What is the legal action? Why hasn't anyone brought a case forward about the unconstitutional maps that they still haven't changed?
They have brought it forward, and they basically ignored the rulings 7 times. Now we have a new court. There's a new process, and I think people actually just assume that this current court. So the 3 members that are now a 4-member majority on the current court, the 3 Republicans who are now been joined by Dieters, from the very beginning said, oh, your maps are fine. They were clearly unconstitutional. They said you have every right to do it that way. So I think people realize this court will go along with it as well. They changed the rules of how we elect courts to get themselves a friendly court. And so my worry on anything that comes their way is they've got themselves an ally in a court, which is essentially a state with no rule of law, if that's the case, with no checks and balances. I have yet to see this court apply checks and balances. I mean, this is a court that allowed, the governor took an entourage to the Super Bowl a year ago or 2 years ago, and it cost the taxpayer some amount of money. We know that.
Energy.
Yeah, like all of it. Like they literally, like, I just worry that they are but I'm saying this court literally ruled that it was it was not a public document to even know how much taxpayer money was spent having the governor fly an entourage of 20 people to a Super Bowl. If they're ruling that way, like, do I trust them to ever be a check and balance on behalf of the citizens? No. So yeah, that's truly in the balance this November. And my hope is, like, and one thing people should know is these are uphill battles. There's no doubt. But in 2018, even when DeWine won the governor's race, we flipped 2 Supreme Court seats. The voters did that. In 2020, even when Trump won Ohio by 8, our candidate for Supreme Court won Ohio by 10. In 2022, Nan Whaley lost by 26. Our Supreme Court candidates only lost by 12. So you can win these even if you're not winning everything. The voters of Ohio have shown some tendency to balance it out. So if we can keep the top of the ticket relatively close, single digits, what we've seen in recent years is we can win these races. And that's why, there's a lot on the ballot in Ohio. Nothing is more important on Ohio's ballot this year than Supreme Court races and the gerrymandering initiative. If you want to save Ohio's democracy, those are the issues that actually matter more. And obviously, your race, Sherrod's race, really important for federal. But for Ohio's democracy, those Supreme Court races and that gerrymandering initiative are as important as anything could be any year on Ohio's ballot.
Right. What about the Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court? There's no checks and balances there either.
Yeah. It's disturbing. I've spent a lot of, this is sort of what I teach. I even wrote articles about this going back decades. I think the court is at a point now that's very disturbing. And I'm not, you're trained as a lawyer to be very deferential to courts, and I am. I don't defy court rulings like the Ohio State House defied the Ohio Supreme Court. But I also think, and so there's sort of lawyers like myself, our instinct is to, even if we don't like what the court said, to be deferential to the process. That's what the rule of law is about. And I get, when I see Frank LaRose attack courts, that he didn't like the agreement, the decision that he doesn't agree with, it offends me as a lawyer. But we're getting to a point now where we have upside down flags being flown by a justice. We're literally, the timing of decisions to take a case, they're now sitting on the immunity decision in a way that is a massive help to Trump, so he doesn't have a trial before the next election, when in other cases they move lickety-split like Bush v. Gore. So the behavior is getting to a point where it's hard not to say, this seems really political. This seems really disturbing. And so I think the senators in Congress need to ask tough questions publicly. And I do think it's making the case. Now, when the Republicans didn't like the result of the Ohio Supreme Court elections, they engaged in court reform real quick, didn't they? They changed the rules of how we elect justices. They did it like that. No one even knew about it. And I do think when we see a court behaving very badly, Thomas Alito not recusing, just like Pat DeWine doesn't recuse from cases involving his own dad, that's when I think having some check and balance from the Senate saying, why are you not recusing? Why are you making statements or looking as if, or your family looking as if you were part of the insurrection or sympathetic? And I think all that needs to be asked. But I also think if that lends itself to some court reform, that's an important conversation. Because I think just sitting back and all of us seeing it kind of for what it is, but thinking, oh, we can't ever bring up the problem. I think that legitimizes things that frankly are very disturbing.
Yeah.
And
I
watch the Republicans. The minute they lost the Ohio Supreme Court, they changed the rules.
yeah.
Here, I'm
That
not talking
that
about.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's my biggest complaint with Democrats. They take too long to act. And I mean, most of the time it's, oh, I wrote an op-ed. It's like, well, write a bill. I mean, I wish that we were more strategic and on the offensive rather than constantly on the defensive and
right.
so late with everything. I feel these cases with Trump, they should have been brought forward years ago,
Yeah.
rather than at the 11th hour. So yeah, I
Well,
totally agree.
what's funny is I think that people made the decision and it was a mistake. I think that Trump was just going to go away.
Oh yeah,
So why bother? Why bother? And I think the lesson learned is when there's a threat to democracy
you
and
bother.
someone has literally tried to undo the result of an election and the transition of power, you bother immediately.
Yeah,
Because whether it's Trump or somebody else down the road, if they don't see that there's accountability for something that goes to the heart of our country,
yeah,
you've set the precedent to do it again and
yeah.
again and again. So I think they thought, oh, Trump lost badly. The truth is, he lost badly. And he was at one point kind of an embarrassment to the parties, where the Giuliani sweat in front of that weird building. Like all of it
Right.
seems so pathetic that I think the decision was made. And who saved the day? House Democrats. They had that special committee on January 6th, and they brought out so much that it kind of forced people to see this was bad. We need to hold accountability. There were laws broken. But I think that a lot of it was, well, we won. He's going to go away. Because what happens in politics in America normally, the losing president goes away. They don't come back. But by taking our foot off the gas, they allowed enough time to do what's happened, which is the worst thing that could happen. The worst precedent to set, and it's being set, I'm afraid. Hopefully it's not, but I'm afraid it is, that you try to undo an election and you break the law in doing so, but the trial on whether or not you did so doesn't happen until after the next election. That is a horrible precedent. Why? Because if you're the person who tried to do the insurrection, you face accountability unless you
You
win the
run for
next.
office again.
Right. So everything we are doing now,
Yeah,
everything we're experiencing is because by bringing in the case too late, we literally create an incentive where Donald Trump, the only way out of his dilemma is to run for the presidency.
yeah,
But here's the problem. And he knows that if he doesn't win, he'll be held accountable for the last insurrection, and he will be, or the spying. But the problem is that means that there's no reason not to keep breaking laws between now and November because he gets held accountable either way. He'll get held accountable for the first set of law violations. So why not keep breaking the law now? Because if he wins, he gets to forgive himself for everything. So by not pursuing the case before the next election, we've created an incentive for all that we're seeing. And it's
yeah.
exactly what you'd expect. So the lesson is if someone is engaged in what they were engaged in, you've got to throw the book at them immediately. So there is
Immediately.
no doubt among that person or anyone else that the accountability will come before your opportunity to get rid of it by winning the next election. By not doing that, we honestly have created the nightmare we're stuck in.
No, I absolutely 1000% agree with that. What do you think that Republicans are? Is it that they fear him or that they want money that he can possibly throw their way? Why?
I
Because
think
with
that it's
Nixon, when Nixon was held accountable, that came from his own party. This is a whole different ball game.
right.
We've never seen a president or person like Trump before. In
Mhm.
some ways, I'm kind of thankful because he exposed all of our loopholes and, all of our weaknesses. So therefore we should have been changing laws to overcome those things, but I haven't seen that happen yet either. Why hasn't someone written a bill? No, you cannot be president if you've been impeached or indicted or if you're in jail. Just the basics.
Right.
I mean, I laughed so hard when they said the Tiger King was running for president, and I'm like, see, when is someone going to write the bill?
Right.
Um, but what is it with this
Uh,
Republican Party?
it's a great
Because
question. Yeah.
now, when the Capitol incident happened, now for a moment they had a window. And it wasn't until Kevin went down to Florida when the tide changed, right?
Yeah.
And since then, they've elected what, like 200 more election deniers to
Mhm.
our Congress. I mean,
Right.
that's the stuff that terrifies me.
Yeah.
They
Well, what I would
totally
say
discount the
about
Republican
why,
Party.
I think it's a combination of things, but I thought it was fascinating the other day to see the Libertarian convention boo
You
Trump
hear them boo him? Yeah.
because those are, you know, that actually, for a lot of sincere libertarian style fiscal conservatives, they should be booing him. He is against almost everything they stand for. Bigger government. He blew up the deficit. He wants to be like the most powerful. He wants all the power for him. Like the sincere conservative response is actually that one. So what it tells you is so I give the libertarians credit, just like the Libertarian Party of Ohio was against issue one last August because they saw it as a threat to the citizens' power to hold their government accountable. So I think that booing actually is kind of a canary in the coal mine that as a principled conservative actually knows that Trump is a problem, like for their ideology. So that means why would Republicans be all for him when a principled libertarian is offended by him? And I think it's much more self-serving. One, I think some of them want to get ahead politically. J.D. Vance, clearly, all of this is a very cynical about face on everything to get ahead.
Yeah.
Others are cowards. Mike DeWine is a coward. Now, maybe he won't come around for Trump this time, but when you watch these old moderates side up to Trump, and, by the way, LaRose is just like J.D. Vance. He used to be a moderate. So there's very much sort of Machiavellian, how do I get ahead? But then there's a bigger picture. There's some greed, obviously. This is corruption. There's a lot of corruption here. And how do you make money? You're not going to make money as a Republican long term if you're standing up to Trump, if you think he's the one in power. But there's another element that I think is really important that is um, driving, let's say, a Mitch McConnell. I think Republicans have gotten so far to the right and so out of the mainstream on everything from abortion access to a lot of other issues that the truth is most of them right now, if they stand up and give a speech, unless they're in a very gerrymandered district, no one's showing up to vote for them. We saw this with Mike DeWine in 2018. There was no one. A Mike DeWine rally in the fall of 18, we saw it. There were 30 people there. No one cared. He's not energizing people. Rob Portman is not energizing people. Almost none of them. You think Marco Rubio is like some rock star? None of them are energized. Ted Cruz in Texas. These are not good candidates, and most of their positions are not popular. So why is Trump so important to them? Because he actually is. He's the one guy, I think the only one, who seems to be able to get a lot of people excited to vote. And they know that. So they don't have anything else left. If Mike DeWine were left to his own devices in Ohio, without Trump having created that caravan, remember the caravan was coming in? That's why people showed up in Ohio in November 18. It wasn't because of Mike DeWine. It's because Trump said a caravan was coming. So his people showed up. That's why Marco Rubio not Marco Rubio. That's why Marco Rubio, like he sees this guy can get votes out. Bernie Moreno in Ohio. He only wins because of Trump turnout. That's the only way he'll win. They actually want Biden on the ballot because the only way Bernie Moreno beats Sherrod Brown is because Trump gets voters out that Bernie Moreno would never get out. So I think the other big reason they can't quit Trump is because they realize without Trump, they don't really have anyone else who gets people excited to show up. They don't have an Obama style figure that, when that person is activated, gets people energized to turn out. So that's the other very sort of Machiavellian decision that I think Mitch McConnell is making, which is if we don't have Trump out there firing up a certain set of voters who only show up when Trump is telling them to, we will lose again and again and again. And so I think that's the other reason. There's people who are afraid of that he'll punish them if they stand up to him, but there's also a broader group that thinks we kind of don't have anyone who really is into Republicans. You think in Kentucky that people are running around saying we're showing up to elect Mitch McConnell one more time? Of course not. But if Trump says show up to vote in Kentucky, there are a group of voters that will show up there. So they're almost like addicted to the Trump turnout
Yeah.
phenomenon that they otherwise don't know how to replicate.
Yeah. How do we win back those voters? I mean, those are blue collar people that do not benefit from
Yep.
his policies. I mean, it
I think we got to go straight at it. And this is again, why are those voters not generally excited to vote for their Republicans? Because the Republican policies haven't done much or anything for them. In many cases, Jim Jordan's a perfect example.
yeah,
Almost
but
every
he votes
single vote he
against
takes,
everything.
yeah, undermining healthcare, jobs, infrastructure in districts like yours that's non-existent. And so I think what we have to do is we have to be the populace saying, you, your representatives, your people are the very people that they're doing the bidding of the big interests, the big private interests, the first energies, the big economic groups, and you're screwed because of it. Your schools are worse because they're giving away the money to a donor who created a for-profit scam and then gave them money back as part of the deal for their campaigns. You're screwed out of your pension as a teacher because they don't want to even have any transparency of how your pension is funded. And that appeals to both Democrat and Republican retirees, for example. You're screwed because in Eastern Ohio, they're not regulating fracking at all. In fact, they're putting some of the worst people from the industry on the very boards that oversee decisions about will water will poisonous or toxic water be leaking in your community. I think we have to go right at people who are being, in East Palestine, Ohio. Did you know that they were trying to regulate rails to be safer by adding more crew for years? And it was the state house that didn't let it happen. No wonder things are dangerous. I mean, we've got to be very blunt that it's been a Republican Party in states like Ohio dominated by corporate interests that have been basically undermining the lives and passing policies against the views of everyday Ohioans for years,
Yeah.
and not be afraid to make that case in a way that's more concise than what I just did. And again, it's everything from schools to clean air to wages to all of it. And
Yeah.
and what Trump did was he took the opportunity from all those negative happenings in these areas, and he said, "I'll save you from them."
Right.
When Democrats are the ones who should be saying, "No, we will." The people who created all that were your Republican representatives,
Yeah.
and we're going to fix it. And I think that's how we get there. I don't think that means you're going to win 50% of most of these districts anytime soon, these state house districts. But you get to the mid 40s, and then you put in where we win, and all of a sudden you win versus not paying attention, not campaigning there, and letting
It-
the other
yeah.
side be the only people there, because they're blaming the fall of schools to CRT and the
Yeah.
border versus no, it's the state house that did it all. They're the ones who took your money and gave it to a for-profit scam instead of your school district. That's
Yeah.
where the problem is. Not all these theories that have nothing to do with Ohio or in many cases America more generally.
Yeah. Yeah. That's funny. You just said something. Oh shoot, now I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, what were we just talking about?
A
Come
lot.
on. I
I
know,
put a
I
lot in there,
know.
so sorry about that.
So good. But shoot. Oh, I can't remember.
That's a good
Oh,
one.
the messaging. Why
Right.
hasn't Biden even talked about the court cases? I feel like it is so important that,
Yeah.
we have and you and I feel the exact same way. Like here in Ohio, when the first time I ran against Jordan in 2022, I was so shocked to find out how many of the county parties did not have a website. They were not on social media. So to
Yeah.
me, it's not rocket science why Republicans are winning in Ohio because they're the only ones talking to voters. A
Mhm.
lot of people are on social media. A lot of people do not watch local news or even get local TV anymore. They're streaming everything. And so, again, if they're the only ones talking to them, we can't be surprised. So I just feel so strongly that as these court cases are on, and then we see all of these Republican representatives go on the TV and say, oh, this is a sham, you know, um, court case and they're all lying and he
Right.
didn't do anything wrong. There should be five Democrats saying, oh yes, this is what is going on, this is what this is about. Why isn't there someone Democrat Party that has a messaging strategy that has the talking points? Why doesn't
Right.
ODP, and I've even mentioned this to the chair, I said we should have 3 to 5 points that Ohio Democrats stand for, that
Right.
we always talk about so people
Right.
understand this is who we are, not leaving it up for the other people to define us. Why
Yeah.
are we not more strategic? Why are we not more consistent? Why do we not have just the basics? It's just basic marketing,
Yeah.
David.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree. I think that Republicans are very good at, creating a
They use
brand, like you said.
psychology and
Yeah.
marketing, and you
Yeah.
have a great
Yeah.
combination there.
I think what happens is generally, and this is true around the country, I think Democrats sort of think, well, we'll leave it to the parties leave it to the candidates. And because of that, sometimes that can be good. If you have a really good candidate, Sherrod Brown is a very strong message. And maybe people follow it. But I think we'd be better off, and I tried to do this when I was a chair, if the party tries to bring some discipline around what are we all saying? And I actually give credit right now. Alison Rousseau is doing this quite well with the caucus. She's the minority leader of the Democrats in the state house. She's talking about people first. Well, that was actually the same thing that we were doing in 18. I did focus groups around the state using marketing people from the private sector. And they found that the Democratic brand, although damaged, actually is still quite strong when you orient it around putting people first. And if we use that frame to build out, everything we do, it's actually a very strong frame. And so I actually called together all the candidates at every level from Sherrod Brown to Richard Cordray to State House and said, we all should be orienting around people first with certain values and issues that build from that.
Yeah.
A lot of candidates actually did exactly that. It was really good. What was interesting was the lower down the ballot the candidate was, the more likely they were to do it because they don't have some consultant or pollster telling them everything they should do. But we did have a lot of candidates begin to use what we were saying. And to her credit, Alison Rousseau is trying to do the same thing right now with state house candidates. But on our side, more than there. And do you know who also did that decently well in 18? And she also said people first? Nancy Pelosi. What happened in 2018? We won Congress. They were all sounding similar. So I think there has to be more of an effort
Yeah.
to corral. Now, we're Democrats are more chaotic than Republicans. In many ways, that's a good thing. We don't just take orders. But I think having some message discipline to say, hey, in your district, these may be the three biggest issues that you care about. And in many places, they will be very similar issues, but frame it, brand it in the same sort of people first, frame, and then we all will sound a lot more similar. Or let's say in Ohio with Sherrod Brown running about the dignity of work. Like, okay, if that's what we're going to go with, let's at least have some discipline so we all are orienting our campaigns around these things. And I do agree with you. The parties too often don't do that at the national level, the state level. And if they're not prioritizing, often the county level, it doesn't bleed through. So, and when we did our people first thing, we obviously had all the county parties. We tried our best to help them do that as well. But it is a flaw on our side. And I remember I'd go to DNC, and I think that let's just put it this way: it's better now than it was, but it's still not where it needs to be. When I first started going to DNC meetings years ago, this was before the current leadership, who I think are doing a pretty good job on a lot of this. I'll never forget. I was at a meeting while I was doing my project about what is the best brand, what is the best messaging. I went to a DNC meeting where one of the leaders of the DNC at the time said, "People ask us what our message is. Well, our message is, let's go out and knock on some doors." I said, "That's not a message. That's important. That's organizing. But your message is, when you knock on the door, what do you actually say?"
Yeah.
But the fact that that was sort of the mindset was, again, kind of, you're right. Like the idea that the party itself and the party structures are getting candidates to at least think through a few key frames and messaging. That just hasn't been the way the party in most places has thought. And I think we pay a price for that. And what happens when we don't do that? Yeah. Not only that, is happy to give your message for you,
Right.
which is, you're a communist, you're a socialist, you're this and that. Like,
Yeah,
so if you
yeah.
want to say, no, we're the ones putting people first. You're
Yeah.
the ones who sold everyone out of the state house. Yeah, if you do that strongly, when they call you communist, it's not going to have an effect. You've already established that's not who we are. We're the ones who stuck up for the public schools in your area that you want to be strong, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, they'll fill that vacuum quick if you don't.
Yeah, I know. That's what I mean.
And the message has to be bigger than one candidate too. This can happen in a
vision, you know?
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
we need a vision, we need a path. I feel that the DNC, it starts at the top, and for DNC, it should be, oh, this is how you run your state. The state should say, this is how you run your county. You're a candidate. Here's your playbook on everything you need to run and win
right.
from A to Z. I mean, we need more streamlined processes that work. If it were me running the DNC, I would do whatever study groups we need to do to find out what areas won, what did they do, and then we replicate that. I mean, it's not rocket science, but messaging is huge.
Yeah,
I meet people every day. They don't know what Biden has done. And
right.
this is the guy who's running to get reelected.
Yeah,
And all they hear is the BS messages that the other side is saying. And that
right.
is why him being old, he's too old and he's not competent, he's not lucid. And those things are sticking because nothing else is being said about it, and
Yeah.
they're kind of shying away from it. And I just feel that's wrong.
Yeah, I think, he's saying it at times, but I think to break through at the state and local level, there needs to be more of an infrastructure that's getting it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that may be the issue, that it's just,
It's
my
just
guess is
repetition.
that my guess is
Marketing.
Pete Buttigieg and Jennifer Granholm are running all over the country trying to do it, but somehow there's not a deep enough infrastructure that's making the case
Yeah.
in a way that people see it or believe it. And I think that's, he needs to do it in the big moments. He does a good job when it's the State of the Union, and people have responded to that. But it needs to be like a daily on
Yes.
offense reminder,
Yeah.
and that takes a messaging infrastructure that
Yeah.
is working 24/7. And I
Right.
think when you look at the numbers, the other day there was a new poll that America thinks we're in a recession. Um, that tells you that whatever is happening is not working. Whatever the messaging point, that we've had this
Exactly.
incredibly low unemployment for a couple of years now, and other data, job growth, and all that. It's just not being. And here's the other flip side: people now believe that Trump had a great economy going before COVID. Well, that's not true either. In Ohio, the job growth of 19 hit zero. It was the first time since the Great Recession that happened. And then it got worse after COVID. But they've managed to convince America that Trump's economic plan was great until COVID ruined it. When the truth is, we had already slumped to 0 jobs by the end of 19 before COVID ever hit. And so it just shows you how if you're not relentlessly making your case for what you did, and one reason they think that is because Trump says every day, "Oh yeah, it was great, it was working." Like it actually wasn't, but you never know it.
That's my point. It's repetition.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just simple psychology. If you hear it enough times, you start believing it. So that is my point. That we need to, be saying all of these things more. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm sure you have more things, a busy day ahead of you, so I will be mindful of that. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us in the Leadership Podcast, a podcast designed to inform, educate, and empower you. I'm your host, Tamie Wilson. I hope today's show inspired you to take your next step in leadership in your life, in your community, and our world. I know together we can make the world a better place. Thank you and see you next time. Until then, live to lead.